Namaste, Sasrika, Shalom Alaikum, Assalamu Alaikum, and Assalamu Alaikum. Welcome to another episode of The Message. As always, I'm your host, Mike Deezee, and today we're going to continue where we left off last week on the Vedic teaching and its links in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. For the second portion of the series, we will focus on Krishna and Jesus and how they're connected, Jesus in India, as well as the Quraysh Hindu tribe. To begin, we'll deal with Krishna and Jesus. Now that we know how the Vedic teaching is tied into the Jewish teaching, let's move on to the Christian end of things. Most, if not all of us, are familiar with the story of Jesus of Nazareth. What we may not know is that the story of Jesus' birth already existed before Jesus' time. If we were to read the 5th and 6th books of the Vishnu Purana, we would find that Krishna, a manifestation of Vishnu, shares the same life experiences that Jesus does. Mind you, Krishna's story was written thousands of years before the Gospels were thought of. So how did the story of Krishna get from India to Israel? Easy answer: the Silk Road. Spices were not the only thing that traveled the Silk Road. Scrolls, writings, and other spices were also sold. Scrolls, writings, and spices were sold on the Silk Road. In fact, the Silk Road would be the route taken by a teenage Jesus to the land of India, where Jesus would learn much of what he would teach to the people of Israel when he returned, or when he began his teaching. Jesus in India. Being that the Gospels were all written in Greek and not Aramaic, also being that the Gospels were written years after the events of the Gospels took place, it should be no wonder why the missing 13 years of Jesus' life are not mentioned in Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. If Jesus was in India, why would the Greeks write about his life in India? India is not Greece. Israel is not Rome. Rephrase. What I should have said was, India is not Greece, Israel, or Rome. Just like the people of India didn't care much for the people of Greece and Israel or Rome, the same is true on the reverse. To know about the life of Jesus in India, we would have to venture into the Vedic writings. While the beginning of Jesus' lifetime in India has not been unearthed yet, there are stories about his returning to India. If it's a fact that what Jesus spoke of in Israel does not come out of the Torah exactly, but his words do match the tenets of the Vedic teaching, it is safe to assume that Jesus spent his 13 years of life in India. When the hard evidence of this is available, it will be presented here on the message. Lastly, the Quraysh tribe of Arabia, who were Hindus. History teaches us that before the Quraysh tribe surrendered to Islam, this Arab tribe were composed of Hindus. If we were to visit various desert tribes of Arabia today, we would find that their version of Islam looks a lot like what we know of Hinduism today. That is because before Islam ruled Arabia, King Vikramaditya, a Hindu, was the ruler. Vikramaditya was responsible for bringing order to the Quraysh tribe, who, according to the inscription in the Kaaba, were a lost people. A student of religion of today would read this and be reminded of the Arabs who were known to come over to Israel and give Gilead a hard time during the period of the champions of Israel, or from the book called Judges. Gilead was a warrior or champion at the time during the period of called the Judges. Very briefly, there are Arabs that were coming from Arabia to Israel and constantly causing fights among the Jewish people. And for every time that the Arabs would come over and cause trouble, the Jews would have to fight the Arabs back to Arabia. Over time, Gilead got tired of dealing with the Arabs, so instead of just fighting the Arabs to the border of Israel to send them back to Arabia, Gilead chose to gather a group of troops and chase the Arabs across the border of Israel into Arabia, into the Arabs' neighborhood, to deal with them there, to show the Arabs that the Jews were not pleased with the actions of the Arabs. Getting back to Vikramaditya, probably after his death is when the Arabs started corrupting the teaching of the Vedic way, which would give rise to Muhammad's message. It is a known fact that the Kaaba that sits in present-day Mecca was built by Abraham and his son Ishmael as a shrine to Shiva. The famous black stone of the Kaaba is the remains of the Shiva Linga that once sat in the Kaaba that was removed due to great misunderstanding by the Muslims. Very briefly, yes, there were many statues that once sat in the Kaaba. The statues were not authentic to Arabia. The statues or images that sat in the Kaaba were imported to Arabia by a member of the Quraysh tribe. That was told a very impressive story by a Greek person or a Roman person, this story of which is more than likely what inspired this particular Quraysh person to bring statues into Arabia. Because again, the statues that were in the Kaaba were not authentic to the region. In order to understand Hindu thinking, we have to get into the Hindu mind. All Hindus know that Allah is an unseen reality. All the angels and demons are all unseen realities. But we have to we haven't thought about the idea of closing our eyes during prayer. Then, if we had thought about that, we would naturally do it. Where would we naturally close our eyes if we're going to, instead of looking at a statue, where would we naturally do it? In a religious setting. We will focus on an object in a religious setting, much like the Catholics focus on a statue of Mary or Jesus today. The parishioner of today knows consciously that the statue is not either Mary or Jesus, in fact. The parishioner of today is using the statue as a focal point for their prayer because that particular worshiper has not thought about the simple, not thought about simply closing his or her eyes. Excuse me as I get tongue twisted. Taking this thinking of the Catholic of today in mind and going back to the desert, if you were to be in the desert, knowing this, knowing that you had enemies around you, even though you are among your own people, the threat of an attack by an enemy tribe is very real. So you would be wise to do what? Keep your eyes open. This is why the Arabs, as well as the Hindus and other people of antiquity, did not close their eyes much while praying. Unfortunately, neither our beloved brother Muhammad nor the members of his group, the Muslims, thought about this, which is why the statues were destroyed. And this is where we'll go. This is where I'm going to stop for now, and we'll go further into it next time. With that said, as always, keep your head right on full blast and speak into your future.